Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Well, welcome to this week's podcast here with host Jimmy Hinton, and Clara is away this week. She's out of town, and actually last week we were super busy, so we didn't record a session, and this week I'm just flying solo. So next week, my mom will return, and we'll be back at it together. So in the meantime, I was really trying to think about a podcast topic and what I really wanted to talk about, and I couldn't settle on any one thing, so this is kind of a mixed bag where I'll be talking about several different things and just giving some important updates for my ministry and what Mom is doing, and I don't know, I just kind of wanted to encourage people because I think excuse me, there's a lot of discouraging things that are going on, and I don't want survivors out there to ever give up. I want them to keep fighting. I want them to know that there are people fighting for them. And most importantly, and this is a message that I need to remind myself, there are churches out there that are getting it right. I know it's really frustrating, and people are just really misinformed and making bad decisions when it comes to how survivors are treated in the church, and really how abusers are handled in the church. Abusers still get a lot of protection. Abuse is still covered up at way too often. But I wanted to share a story or two about churches that are getting it right, and I think we need to know that they're out there. They do exist. And so I'll talk a little bit about that too. I wanted to talk about a current events issue that just happened last night here in my own state of Pennsylvania. And that is the Senate Bill 261, which is also known as the Window to Justice. And this was one of the recommendations in the Pennsylvania grand jury report that was released back in August. And in that report, for those who don't know, it was uncovered that there were over 300 abusers in the Catholic Church, all of them covered up, and there were over 1,000 survivors who came forward as a result of that investigation. Since the investigation, there have been over 1,200 phone calls to the abuse hotline that was set up by our Attorney General's office, and I think that's really significant. We know that there are thousands of survivors out there just within the Catholic Church, and there was a really extensive cover-up, a very elaborate cover-up. I've read the grand jury report. It's over 800 pages. It's pretty hefty, pretty emotionally draining report to read. I recommend everybody read that. I really do. I think people need to get a grasp on how abuse cover-ups happen. It's not hypothetical. It's not like there are a couple wacko people out there and, they have these conspiracy theories and there's a handful of churches that cover up. This is an epidemic. This grand jury report that was released, it demonstrated that in every single diocese in the state of Pennsylvania, with no exceptions, there were multiple cover-ups of child sexual abuse. They knew about the abuse. They hid the abusers. They shuffled them from church to church and state to state, and these guys had free reign. So one of the survivors who appeared in that grand jury report was State Representative Mark Rossi. I've met Mark Rossi. Mark Rossi is a great guy, and he's the one who wrote the legislation in the House that passed overwhelmingly a few weeks ago. It was a nonpartisan bill, and both House Republicans and Democrats passed this bill, the Rossi Amendment, overwhelmingly. That went over to the Senate, and actually, actually a little bit surprisingly, it sounds like most of the senators were going to vote for the Rossi Amendment as is. But it ended up getting blocked last night, and they were ticking on the clock, and at the last minute, Scarnati, who's a Republican in the Senate, decided to block it, and it never went up for a vote. So I think it was just a slap in the face to survivors, not only in the state of Pennsylvania, but all over the country and really all over the world. A lot of people are watching Pennsylvania right now to see what we're going to do, and we're eventually going to get it right. I think we've gotten it right on a lot of legislation in the state of Pennsylvania, and I think the Senate will get this right. I really do. But I think survivors need to keep the pressure on, because I actually got to see how effective that is. Survivors, you guys are awesome. You guys rock. And you have so much more power than you think you do. And man, just by speaking up and speaking out, you have the ability to just create a tidal wave of change. So keep up the good work. We have an attorney general who's just awesome. Josh Shapiro and his office, they're just absolutely fantastic. And I've gotten to see some of the behind the scenes things that go on, and I don't know. We just have a really compassionate person who cares about survivors. So survivors, keep it up. I think this window to justice is going to open. It's going to pass. And what it's going to do is allow survivors who are outside of the statute of limitations, it'll open up a 2-year window where they're able to civilly sue the organizations that covered up their abuse. And what the survivors want ultimately is for their abusers' names to be on public record. That's it. They're not looking for money. They're not looking for any recognition whatsoever. They just want their abusers' names on record so that we can protect more kids. I think it's a very noble, amendment. I think this bill, if it were to pass as is, I think would be a really good thing. So keep up the pressure, keep up the good work for all you survivors, and we're just going to keep pushing forward. The next thing I wanted to talk about is it's a ministry that's really close to my heart, and it was launched a couple weeks ago by a very, very good friend of mine, Christine Parker, and I actually sit on the board of directors for this new ministry. The ministry is Porch Swing Ministries. You guys know that I have a passion for who I call the spiritual outcasts. Those are survivors who are still believers, but they don't have a church to call home. A lot of survivors have been so wounded by the way that the institutional church has treated them. They've protected their abusers and ultimately cast them out of the church, the survivors, that is. So survivors are typically either kicked out of the church or they're made to feel like they're the problem. So there are several ways, and Mom and I have talked about this, but there are several ways that churches make survivors feel like they're the problem. You guys hear things like, well, you need to just forgive your abuser and move on. If you ever bring it up, it's like you're the problem. That you shouldn't be bringing this up. You shouldn't even mention it. Just let it go. Forget about it. Forgive your abuser and move on. Well, the reality is it doesn't work that way, nor should it. That's not a biblical response by the church. In fact, I think it's a really evil response. So a lot of you survivors are just really struggling. And I think to add insult to injury, when you don't feel safe to walk into church and to be among your family, who's supposed to be your family anyway, you don't feel safe to be there. To add insult to injury, then people start hurling insult at you once you leave the church. And they'll say things like, well, your faith wasn't really strong to begin with. Or, well, you didn't really believe in God in the first place. Or, you're not really faithful because you don't come to church. You guys hear these things and it's just so insulting and it's so untrue. So I have a really big heart for the spiritual outcasts, the people who are genuinely wounded by oppressors, by abusers, whether that's domestic violence or spiritual abuse or sexual abuse. Abuse is hurtful, no matter what kind or type of abuse it is. Abuse is just hurtful. And it's very damaging. And so I love all of you survivors who've been cast out of the church. You're the castaways, the people who are disregarded, and you don't feel safe, you don't feel at home, and so you sit at home and you don't have a community to call your church anymore. But you're still believers. So fortunately, my dear friend, Christine Parker, also has a heart for spiritual outcasts because she is one herself. And she just has a powerful story, and one day, soon, Mom and I are going to interview her, and we're going to let her tell you her story. She launched Porch Swing Ministries, and I'll give a little bit of background about Porch Swing Ministries, but I'm going to let her explain more what her ministry is. But in a nutshell, in her most desperate time of need, she found a place of sanctuary, a place that was safe, a place that felt safe, and that was her porch swing. And I've actually sat on her porch swing. There was a time in recent history where I just was really struggling, and it was really cool because I was in her town. She lives in another state, and I was visiting, and I was actually visiting a university for a workshop that was going on. And I got a phone call that just, it was really alarming, and, just kind of put me in a bad place pretty quickly. And so she said, why don't you sit on my porch swing? I'm going to go in my house, and, I'm going to talk to my son. We're going to kind of hang out inside. I want you to sit on my porch swing and just realize that this is a place of peace. Let all that other junk go and just swing and pray and meditate and just know that God is sitting on that swing with you. I got to tell you, that was medicine to the soul. The second I sat on that porch swing, I just felt this calm rush over me. And I think it's so cool that she started this ministry called Porch Swing Ministries, because she told me that she would never do to other people what was done to her by the church. That she would create this safe space where nobody would be judged, nobody would be told that they can't talk, that they can't cry, that they can't laugh, that they can't express emotions. And so that porch swing really became a metaphor for this ministry and for where her heart is. And so one of the components that we're really working hard on at Porch Swing Ministry is something that I brought up in a podcast several months ago, where I talked about this idea of an online church, an online community for the outcasts. So that's one of the really powerful and important and necessary components of Porch Swing Ministries. And that's something that we're working hard on right now. So that's going to be a reality, and I am super excited about that because I think that's coming down the pike really soon. In fact, Christina and I just talked yesterday on the phone. We spoke for about an hour, maybe a little over an hour, and we were talking about kind of the direction of Porch Swing Ministries and particularly the online church portion. How can we create community where we pull all of you guys together and let you talk to each other and pray for each other and know that you're not alone and know that you're still valued and that you're still needed and that you're still Christian. So I think I'm really excited about that, and I just think that's a really cool thing. So I wanted to put a plug in for that. Another thing, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but not really. This weekend, we have Christian Broadcasting Network is coming to interview Mom and myself and the victim who came forward and disclosed to us and told us about the abuse. So this is the first time that my family is sharing our story publicly. And we're a little bit nervous about that. It's very humbling, and we want to do the story justice. And it's a powerful story, and I don't really share it publicly. Mom and I have shared some details, but people don't really know what unfolded within our family and how it happened and why it happened. And so I'll be sharing that whenever they publish that. I'll be sharing that with the world. So I'm pretty excited about that, and I think it's just a pretty humbling opportunity that they even wanted to interview us in the first place. Another thing, a lot of people ask me about a book. When are you going to write a book? Well, actually, I'm in the process of writing one right now. I began back in the spring writing a book, and I'll share the title. I was going to leave you guys on the hook, but I'll share the title. I don't know what the subtitle is yet, but the title is The Devil Inside. And the notion behind this book is just telling the story from my perspective, because I was the one who, grew up with my dad. I'm the one who, out of all of my siblings, went into ministry because I respected my dad. I looked up to my dad. And because he was a minister, I went into ministry. And theologically, I discovered after this all blew up in 2011 that the devil looks nothing like what we think the devil looks like. That evil doesn't look like anything that we think or expect it to look like. That evil works best when it's disguised as somebody who we love and who we trust. And so the devil knows that the best way to hurt people in the worst ways is to use people who are closest to us, the people who are supposed to love us and protect us, to be our protectors, to be our comfort, to be our shelter, the devil uses those people to inflict the worst kind of harm on us. And so this book, The Devil Inside, talks about how the devil, through my dad, got inside not only the church, but inside my own family, and how none of us saw it. And, I'll talk about some of the damage and about deception. And I've become an expert in deception through all of this, and I'm going to unpack some of that stuff. So it's kind of a cool book. It's been pretty challenging to write because it digs up all kinds of emotions, and I actually had to put it down for a couple months because it just, it was making a lot of things surface that I didn't even know were inside of me. But I am pouring my heart and soul into this book. This isn't something that I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to kick a book out. I'm going to talk about my story and get a book published. That's not what this is. I am pouring my absolute heart and soul into this book because I want it to be right. I want people to understand that the punch to the gut, whenever you find out that somebody who's closest to you is an abuser of the worst kind, it's so devastating. And it just knocks the wind out of you. It takes the life out of you. It saps you of joy. But the flip side of that is that we can become overcomers. And that's the cool part. So it's not a book that just, depresses you and leaves you upset and with no hope. The book leaves you knowing that you can be a conqueror. Through Christ, you can be a conqueror. And it's just a powerful story. So I've shared it with Mom, what I've written so far. I gave her a manuscript. She's an author herself. And so I really trust and value her perspective. And she's really excited about it. So that's pretty cool. I'll be finishing that up hopefully within the next couple of months. And I don't know when the publish date will be. In fact, I don't have a publisher yet. So if there are any of you listening who can point me to one or there's somebody who you really like, trust, respect, certainly let me know. And finally, I wanted to talk about some of the research that I'm doing. And that's not on standstill. It's just trying to chip away at that and find time to chip away at that is really challenging. But we are making progress. So I I collaborate with Dr. Stephen Macknick and Dr. Susanna Martinez Conde. And I just really respect them and the work that they do in the field of illusions and deception. It's just groundbreaking. And they've just opened up such a big door for research in the field of pedophilia. And I just am really indebted to them. So we're still working. We're working hard. And the next thing that's coming down the pike is going to be a very short instructional training video that the three of us put out together. And that's going to show people how deception works, and specifically how deception works with child abusers. And this is a video that you'll be able to give to your church leadership. You'll be able to give to family members. It's going to be a freebie. We're not going to charge anything for this video because we want it in the hands of as many people as possible. So I want you to know we literally have nothing to gain from putting this training video out there. We just want people to be informed, and that's it. There's no underlying motivation. We don't get a dime from it. In fact, it's going to cost us money to make it. And so I just want to tell you, like, these two people are really people of integrity. And I think that speaks a lot to scientists who are collaborating with somebody like myself, and they just, they really believe in protecting people from abusers, and I have the utmost respect for them, and I'm really excited for that. So I told you about some churches that are getting it right, and I want to start first of all with my own congregation. I had a meeting with my elders last week, and we went at their request to revisit our policy, our protection policy, and they just keep coming back and saying it's not good enough. And I don't take offense to that. In fact, I'm encouraged by that. And the one component that we really hammered on in this 4-hour meeting was, what do you do with known sex offenders? And this is probably the most frustrating issue that I see with churches, because this is what leads to the cover-ups. It's this bad theology that says, all sins are the same, all sinners are equal, and it doesn't matter what you've done. You don't have to talk about your past because it's so shameful. And so they apply this bad theology to oppressors, to abusers, to people who delight in inflicting harm on God's most innocent creatures. And what that looks like is exactly what the Catholic Church did, and it's what the Protestant churches are doing as well. We just don't document it like the Catholics do. But that's how these cover-ups happen, and I see them all the time. And it's where churches, the church leaders know that there's an abuser in the congregation, but they feel that it's unfair to inform the congregation and to let them know that they have registered sex offenders in the congregation, or somebody who has a credible allegation against them. And so they keep it quiet, and inevitably what happens is that parents within the congregation, parents of young children, get to be friends with these guys because they have no reason not to trust them. And they strike up a relationship, and then outside of church, where there's no possible ability for church leaders or anybody else for that matter to monitor these guys in any capacity, they start hanging out in the homes of their quote-unquote new friends, and of course they're making friends with their new friends' children. And next thing you know, they're offering to babysit, or they're offering to take the parents' kids to the park, or whatever it is, and they end up molesting these children. And I see it time after time after time after time. So my elders came back, and I vent my frustrations to them. They said, basically, over our dead bodies will that ever happen here? And they said, you need to tighten up the policy, and we're going to help you do that. And we're going to make it so that anybody who's a sex offender or who has a credible allegation against them, that's going to be aired to the world. Everybody's going to know that. And they said that's something that we will not compromise on. And they said we also want to write in the policy that if any of us church leaders ever compromise on that if we ever withhold information from the congregation, that there's a process where there's an immediate removal of that person from being a church leader. So whether it's an elder, a deacon, or a minister, that person is immediately removed from their position. And I stood in all of that, and I was in tears, and I just thanked these guys because they are so passionate about protecting children. And to see them tear up and to get very animated when they're talking about the protection of children is just refreshing to me. And I think that's really cool. And there's another church, and I won't mention which because it doesn't really matter. And I'm not comfortable saying what congregation this is. But there was one who I'd given up hope on. And it was a case of mishandling abuse and a known abuser. And I got contacted by this church, and they said that, they met, they reconsidered, they thought about it, and they feel like they need some outside help. And so they would like me to come in and do training with them. That's cool. That's commendable. And I'm just so encouraged by that. So survivors, keep the conversation going with your church leaders. Even if they say things that are hurtful, even if they say things that make you want to hide under a rock, even if you're frustrated and you want to bang your head against the wall, keep talking to them. Keep pressure on them. Keep having conversations with them and be respectful. But just don't ever give up. Get help from other people from within the congregation, so that it doesn't look like it's just one person who wants to have this conversation. Keep talking to them, because it does work. You guys are making an impact. And this church that was humbled, that changed their mind and that now want to get training and they want to consult, that was because there were a few survivors in that congregation who had really hard conversations with the church leaders. And I'm just really encouraged by that. And I could give you several examples of this, but there are churches who want to get it right. Even if it's not initially, there are some leaders within the batch, and probably the majority of leaders have good hearts. They just don't have good information, and so they don't make good decisions. And I just want you to keep talking to your church leaders. Keep that dialogue open and never give up. All right. Well, I'm going to leave on that note. And I think the truth bomb that I'll leave you with is just find your passion and do it. Do it right now. Don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait 7 years down the road. Find what your passion is and whatever you're passionate about, and start doing it today. No regrets, right? Love you guys, and keep on listening, and next week Mom will be back with us. We'll catch you next episode. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.